hace, pierna derecha, directo al arco, ¡golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
And good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today for Monday. What date is it? I don't know. It's during the Olympics. My dates are all confused. So it's Monday. It's day 3 of the Olympics. But we have a special Soccer Today for you to talk about the United States Soccer Federation election. And to talk about it, we have Beau Dure, who has been covering the election for weeks, if not months now. And Beau, good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, it did certainly feel like I don't know, the end of an obsession or something. So yeah, in fact, I actually kind of made plans that once I got out of the room and got out of the press conference, everything like that, I threw on a T-shirt and a hat and sunglasses and was just happy to goof off for a couple of hours while I waited for a taxi to take me back to the airport. It was months of just everything you could imagine and a lot of things you probably couldn't or shouldn't imagine.
Fair enough. And Kevin, really quickly, I just wanted to tell you that it's 2 days to Valentine's Day. Just keep that in mind and you'll be fine, okay?
Good. That's good to know. All right. Mental note done. Checked.
All right. And that goes to anyone listening as well. Beau, I guess I'll start with this. On Twitter, it seems like, a lot of people think the world has ended. I'm wondering whether in the room and around the vote, whether you got the same sense that people viewed this election as life and death, the same way that it seems that a lot of people outside the room were thinking of it.
Well, it just shows the disconnect between Twitter and reality when you get right down to it, to put it in bluntest terms. When you go around and talk with, state association people and, look, some of the people who were around and voting, maybe they've been in their post too long. Maybe they're not paying attention to the wider scope of things beyond their state. I think a lot of them are, and a lot of them have been doing this for 20 or 30 years, and really have devoted their lives to building up this sport. So it's a little obnoxious when you have people speaking on behalf of, say, Rocco Camiso or Ricardo Silva, or people who've been in the sport for a couple of years at best, to come in and start lecturing them about how out of touch they are. Maybe it's the people on Twitter who are out of touch. And that's not to say that there aren't legitimate reform questions out there. And certainly a lot of the fringe became the mainstream because you had a couple of candidates certainly, retweeting things and having their own conspiracy theories and so forth. But the bottom line is a lot of the issues on Twitter are not the real world issues. The real world issues are youth development, and everyone, including Carlos Cordero, sees that and has a lot of good ideas, frankly, for dealing with that. And really a culture change that perhaps begins with more transparency. And we have reason to think that Cordero will help down that road because as vice president, he really started pushing for that. And people talk about him as if he's, just more of the same. He was only vice president for 2 years. He's vice president for 2 years, and then in that time, he really led the board to institute, things that are boring. It's not as exciting as saying, hey, we're going to shift everything to the European calendar, or we're going to have promotion and relegation all of a sudden for everything. Those are exciting promises. And for Cordero, it's more, we're going to have a risk and audit committee, which is actually fairly important. It's just boring. Yeah.
Governance. It's people don't want to talk about that sort of stuff. So I guess I'll ask you this. In an overarching way, how important was this election? How much influence does the president really have to shape the game in the way that a lot of people that are critical of what's happening think that needs to be shaped?
I think the importance of this election goes beyond the result. And I know a lot of people seem to think that it was a massive defeat for change. It wasn't. Letsy Lawless was saying before the election that the winner, regardless of the result, was going to be Eric Winalda, because he either was going to win or he was going to lose, but know that he had really taken his message out and brought it into the mainstream and so forth. And that's absolutely true. Now, the president has limited powers. And in fact, no matter who won this election, someone's going to be coming in with far less power than Sunil Gulati has had, because Sunil Gulati had 3 unopposed elections. He has had 12 years to really solidify things. If you watch the way he run things, and I attended my first, in addition to the big meeting of the annual general meeting is the National Council, where everyone gets in a big room, and that's where they have the election. That was Saturday morning. The day before, there was a board of directors meeting that was mostly open. They did have an executive session at the end, and it's instructive to sit and watch how Sunil Gulati runs things. And yeah, he is a little overbearing. And I think that's probably a result of spending 12 years in that position with very few people challenging him. And whoever won, whether Cordero, Kathy Carter, Winalda, Martino, anyone, they wouldn't be able to command the same, I don't know if respect is the word, but they wouldn't be able to just sort of run things as with the power and the political capital that Sunil had. So things were going to change no matter who won. And so I think, is it a giant leap into the abyss with Eric Winalda or Hope Solo? No, it's a tentative jump into things to see, it is a step for change rather than a leap into it.
Now, what I'm wondering, Beau, is because of the way this campaign unfolded, there was almost a fracture at the grassroots level, just because of difference of opinion, difference of mentality, of literally where this sport should be going in this continent, in this country, in North America, well, in the United States, as in this specific case. Is the base too fractured now? Is the job of the newly elected president, Carlos Cordero, to reunite the grassroots of the United States Soccer Federation? Is it a doable job, or has too much damage been done?
No, it's funny in the sense that, in a lot of senses, the opinions are the same. I mean, if you were to do a blind taste test essentially on all the platforms of the candidates, they all looked pretty much the same. They all had various ideas for reducing costs in youth soccer, which everyone recognizes as a problem, because that in turn goes hand in hand with the diversity problem, where the U.S. is not getting into underserved communities the way that it should. And I think everyone at least says they agree to that. At least on paper, they agree to that. Now, the problems are going to be that you have some entrenched organizations that have it's almost like backwards capitalism in the sense here, because the more organizations you have in youth soccer, the higher the cost gets, because they all set up their own little elite leagues, and so they all travel past each other, and travel costs money, and the field space costs money, and they're all bumping into each other, and it all costs a lot of money. So I think whether they can tame that monster, I think, is yet to be seen, because it wouldn't have been very politically expedient for a candidate to say, you know what, I'm going to force U.S. youth soccer and U.S. club soccer to play in the same leagues together. That's probably not the smartest thing to say during a campaign, and no one said it. But it's something that is going to have to be thought about.
Which leads me to this, Beau. Now, what is the first bullet point on Carlos Cordero's agenda? What should be the first task as newly elected president of the United States Soccer Federation? Which task should get his attention first?
Well, for him, it's making sure that the U.S. lands the World Cup bid, and that he made no pretense about that's what he sees. And Cordero was unusual in this election in the sense that there was a feeling among certainly a lot of the so-called reform candidates that, we have the money to do things because U.S. soccer has this reserve now of $150 million. Cordero cast it very differently. He said, well, $150 million seems like a lot until you look overseas and see that, England and Germany and our big competitors are all turning over $500 million a year. And our annual, the annual budget in the U.S. is still in the 120 some million range. So they could spend all that money in 1 year and still not come close to matching what they have elsewhere. So the World Cup bid is really seen as a way of jumpstarting everything, jumpstarting interest, and certainly boosting things financially. So that's his top priority, and he made a compelling case with that. I think there's still people who would like for him to do what some other candidates were thinking and have, say, a youth summit. Say, look, we're going to get together and we're going to figure out how to keep costs down and how to make coaching education cheaper and to make it less chaotic, so that a common complaint among soccer parents is that if you move from California to Virginia, you have no idea what league you're getting into, because what is an elite league in one place may not be the top league in another place. Classic may mean something. All the terminology is different. So if you move to a new area, you have no idea what league is actually developing kids to play at higher levels, and that's a serious problem.
Fair enough. A lot of the attention in the public sphere, the non-voting sphere, on this election was geared towards professional league standards and approaches and things like that. So I'm curious, Beau, what your take on that is. How important is evolving the professional club game to the overall problems that do plague the system?
I think this election showed that that such issues are just simply don't resonate outside of a small group of people. I would say there's a fair amount of distrust right now of certainly the NASL. I mean, it's at some point you have to turn around and go, come on, why are you suing the federation for not getting your way on these pro league standards? And I don't think that's a common complaint among the youth organizations and so forth. Also promotion and relegation itself. I asked Carlos Bocanegra of the Athletes Council, which met for 6 or 7 hours on Friday, and was trying to get a sense of what they were talking about. And I said, promotion and relegation? He said it never came up. So it just doesn't resonate, in part because I just don't think people have come out with a reasonable idea of how to do it right now. It is, even though it's gone more mainstream, it's still, well, you'd better elect someone who forces MLS to do X, Y, or Z, or you'd better, let us set up our own pyramid and give us Division I status, even though these people invested billions of dollars to make it happen. And that just doesn't fly with a lot of people outside Twitter. And it's something that they're having to realize. I hope at some point that they realize they're going to have to retrench. And I'm going to have a blog post about this later this week. There are ways to make these things happen. There are ways to make the pro league standards better and to make it so that more people can go pro, and perhaps experiment with promotion and relegation and demonstrate that it can work. There are ways to do that, but if you just want to go on Twitter and whine about it, it's not going to happen. And that's the message of this election.
All right, simple question, Beau. Is U.S. soccer as quote-unquote broken as some people seem to think it is?
Yes, but at different levels. The youth game, and I say this as a parent, I mean, there's a reason my podcast is called Ranting Soccer Dad. I'm angry. Youth soccer has been not the experience that I would want it to be. Now, some of that is just local things, but some of it is just the way the game is set up nationally and the way we think about it, and the way everything costs way more than it should, and the way we've devalued recreational soccer. We've made everyone think that they need to be chasing the elite levels of the game instead, and so they go up thinking that they need to be on this rat race through age 9 through 12. They hit age 12 and they say, well, this isn't fun. And so you have players who aren't just bowing out of the elite development pyramid, they're bowing out of the game. They're like, I've had enough. I don't care about this sport anymore. And that hurts the fan base in the long run. And that's where the real problem is to me. It is at the youth level. And frankly, we, the media, and a lot of people have said very nice things about how I've covered it and how other people have covered this election. I mean, we had tons of people there covering it, and the annual general meeting in the past has had, you might have Paul Kennedy from Soccer America, and that's it. They credentialed 60 people for this, which, as they put it to me, was 60 more than usual. So there's been a lot of attention on the election, but I don't think we got into the youth issues enough, because that really is the important part of it. That is where we are losing the plot. U.S. population keeps going up, and frankly, Carlos Cordero said this very well. Our population keeps growing. Interest in the sport keeps growing at a commercial level. U.S. youth soccer, and I don't mean just one organization, but all U.S. youth operations are stagnant. How do you explain that? That's staggering to think that there are as many or even fewer youth players playing today as there have been when the game has gotten so much bigger in the United States.
Now, to finish this special edition of Soccer Today, Beau, this election had a lot of high-profile candidates. And Carlos Cordero won this, what could be probably known in the future as this superstar election now. What is the future of the other candidates? And my question to you, Beau, is will we see one of those 7 candidates in the next election for United States Soccer Federation? Will any of the other 7 will be there for maybe to run again?
It's funny, with Cordero being elected to the presidency, there's a vacancy for vice president, and they have not yet decided how they're going to fill that. They could hold a special election either in person, or apparently you can do that election by mail, but it takes a 60-day period, because they have put in place, actually just last year, a 60-day period to declare and make sure that you have background checks and essentially a campaign period. So it can't happen immediately, and it might not even happen until next year's annual general meeting. They can get by without a vice president for a whole year if they really want to, or it may not be a priority to them compared to other things going on at the time. But the funny thing is, if you were to ask which of the other 7 candidates would be most likely to run for vice president, I think the answer you would get would be Mike Winograd. And bear in mind, Winograd made it through the first ballot. I forget if he was 6th or 7th on that first ballot, and then on the second ballot he got 0.0. He got the Bluto GPA vote, and so he immediately dropped out. But he's someone who made a good impression on a lot of people. So the fact that he was 6th, 7th, or 8th on the actual vote, it just means he was a lot of people's second or third or fourth choice, and he didn't rub anybody the wrong way in this election. And so he's somebody who could, and he was legitimately thought of as a reform candidate. So he's someone who could be a reformist who was somewhat palatable, not as outspoken, not as prone to make wild accusations as some of the other candidates have been. So that could be someone I see getting involved. I'm not sure where Winalda goes from here. I think we may find that, Winalda's best place may be coaching and also punditry. I mean, he is a fantastic pundit. He had a great Sirius XM radio show. I hope he goes back to that, frankly. And that might be his best role. I'm a little curious to see what happens with Kyle Martino, who I think impressed a lot of people. He approached things very seriously and is, almost as charismatic a speaker as Winalda is. Certainly well liked for his NBC TV coverage, but certainly someone who could possibly find a role in the Federation at some point.
Beau, thank you very much for your time today on Soccer Today, and as well on the Fabric Podcast. If you like the Olympics, the Winter Games, Pyeongchang 2018, you can listen to today's show, which Beau was our guest, and we talked about his highlights for the game so far. Beau, thank you very much for your time today once again, and have a beautiful continuation on this wonderful Winter Games. And I don't know if it's Monday or Friday or whatever day, but thank you very much, Beau.
Shaun White for U.S. Soccer President. Combine it all.
Sure, why not? Things will get done. And thanks to the listeners for listening to this special edition of Soccer Today. You can follow Duane on Twitter at 24th Minute and myself at Kev Laramee. We'll be back if something needs to be talked about in the world of soccer. If not, we'll be focusing on Five Rings for the next few weeks. Let us know your thoughts on both at SportsPodNet, at Soccer Today SPN, and subscribe to our YouTube page to never miss a live show, youtube.com/sports podcasting network. Until next time, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.